Hello and welcome to Shrinking Classics. I'm your host, Caleb Nelson. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and this week we're talking about Great Gatsby.
And I'm Leslie Nelson, and my background is in marriage and family.
And this will be great because there's a lot of, marital issues in Great Gatsby, and
Oh
there's a
boy.
lot of psychology in Great Gatsby. So hopefully we'll be able to have a good, entertaining and intellectual conversation about this book full of, unsavory characters.
Definitely unsavory. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if F. Scott Fitzgerald set out to write, a whole slew of characters that are kind of unlikable in a lot of ways. I don't know, but that's kind of what I feel like he did, with the exception of um, Nick Carraway. He seems like a decent enough guy, and
The narrator, right?
yes, and and I do feel that Gatsby, troubled as he is, I feel like he has his likable qualities, but kind of
Yeah.
in a sad way.
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking when I was reading this, is there any other book that has so many unlikable characters? And it made me think of Wuthering Heights also has a cast of like unlikable characters. It's just kind of surprising and jarring because usually when you read a book, an author wants you to like at least the main character, right? And so
Right.
when you come across a book like Great Gatsby or Wuthering Heights or 1984, where you don't really, you don't like, admire, whatever, really care about the main character, it's just surprising.
Right. It's an interesting take on novels because, yeah, typically you want to write a novel about someone that is relatable or someone that they can like the reader can relate with or at least be like, wow, this person's really cool. But yeah, this book is like, I feel like that's kind of the point is that maybe it's not the point, but I feel like he did some of that on purpose that these people aren't very relatable. And it is kind of a, is this what it's like in rich society kind of book, like I almost feel like he was kind of poking fun at the upper class in this story. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just kind of the feeling I get because
It's
it's
definitely the feeling that comes across.
right. He seems to draw this kind of like separation of this is what the upper class is like, and we don't like them. I feel like Charles Dickens would have liked this book if he read it because
Right.
Charles Dickens was always pretty big on not being a big fan of money and seeking after money and all that stuff. So I feel like maybe he would have liked this book because yeah, it's interesting. There's just, anyways, yeah, maybe we'll just jump into it. We'll just
Well, I think that's a good jumping off point to one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading. And I was hoping, with your background in psychology, you can help me a little bit with this. But was like just the group dynamic. I think sometimes the way people acted, like especially at parties and things, is not the way that they would naturally act, but the way they act because that's kind of what's expected in that setting. It's they're
right.
part of
It's
a
a
group
facade,
and they act how the group acts. Right. And so I just think like Jordan, maybe Jordan would have been different. I kind of always kind of love Jordan, but I'm kind of don't like her. I mean, feel but I wonder if she would have been different if we plucked her out of that and put her in a different society, a different group, because she's responding to the cultural expectations. You know what I mean?
right? Yeah, and that's an interesting thought, and I think it's also true because that's true. I feel like a big motif in this book is the effect that people around you have, and it's kind of
Yes.
like the people that you're around is kind of if you take a kind of if you look at it like meat. When you're preparing meat, I don't do this, but I hear that's what you should do. When you're preparing meat, you want to marinate it. And so you get all these seasonings, you put in this whatever flavorings, and you just leave it in there for some pretty long amount of time so that all that flavor gets absorbed into the meat. And as people, we are kind of the same way. So if we're around these kind of snobby people, then over time we're either going to leave or we're going to become more snobby and become more like them because or else there's no reason for us to be there. And so I think that's true that so maybe Jordan and this and then the story and maybe Nick, they're all starting to get influenced by this society, and maybe they're not a big fan of it at first, but the longer they stay there, the more they feel like they have to kinda, start to when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And
Exactly, and it makes me wonder if it's not really, I don't know, Dickens and Fitzgerald might disagree with me. They're smarter than I am, so they can. But I wonder if the problem is not so much the money as the culture that tends to surround it.
right,
So, note to self, if ever I were to get rich, don't hang out with West, the West Egg people or whatever. You know what I mean?
right.
Those snobby rich people, because I might become like them. You know what I mean? I'm thinking it's not the money that would make me act like that. It's the people that I would then associate with that think that this is what people with money like.
No, absolutely, and because the thing is, so money is a fascinating thing, and maybe that's something we could talk about today. Because the psychology of money is a very interesting thing. Because, like, think about it. What is money? It's just paper. It's just paper that represents how much gold is worth in our country, essentially. And so the fact that I have a dollar, all that means is that this dollar, this paper can be used to buy part of a candy bar. Like, get that, a part of a candy bar. I remember the days, and now I'm not
When
that
you could
old.
buy a few candy bars.
Right, but I remember when it was buy one, get one free, 2 candy bars for $1, and that was awesome. Now we're like $1.25 for one, and buy one, get one half off. I'm like, "Ooh, what a bargain."
Yeah, right.
Anyways, slight ramble aside, yes, money is not inherently the problem. The problem is the the overall feeling and the overall mentality that comes with accumulating wealth. Because, yeah, you could have millions of dollars and no one would ever know. And some people do that. There are some people, they just save money, it stays in their bank account, and then they die, and it's like, "Do you know that this guy was a millionaire?" And it's because money doesn't have to affect you, but the people that you're around, it does affect you. And so the problem that you get into is I feel like when people have money, then they like to do expensive things because we all just assume that expensive things are more fun. And so you start doing expensive things, and so you start meeting people who like expensive things. And the longer you're with those kinds of people, the more that they kind of rub off on you. And and I feel like that's a large part about this story is talking about the dangers of, and yeah, I agree. It's not the dangers of money, it's the dangers of the wealthy culture, if you would. So not that rich people are bad, but that there's a culture that a lot of rich people subscribe to, even if they don't intend to at first, they start to subscribe to it because it's their group. And so they don't want to be an outlier. And so they just kind of conform to it. What do you think? Is that kind of what
Well,
you were
I
thinking all along those lines?
yes, I was thinking along those lines too. I like that. And I'm thinking also part of it is that well, I think part of it's a pursuit of happiness, but which I want us to talk about, but I don't want to jump ahead to that. So let's stick with this for a minute. I'm thinking also it's like sometimes wealth becomes a symbol you're trying to show, I don't know, your peers and whatever that you've succeeded, you've accomplished something in the world. And yet the more you try to do that, there's always somebody else that has more.
Right.
And so you end up never being quite, you can't be the king of the mountain. Remember with kids, you play that game, King of the Mountain.
Right.
I think
Hmm.
most people have done that. And so it's like they're trying to get caught up in this king of the mountain thing. Well, you have a nice boat, but I went on vacation to such and such place. You know what I mean? Insert your dream vacation here. But
Right.
and they get where I think they can get caught in a trap of like being competitive and trying to show that they're successful and feel successful. And yet I feel like the book is showing that all that looks glittery and glamorous on the surface, but when you actually get into that world, you see that it's not glamorous at all. At
Right. It's a
least
matter of
nothing about Great Gatsby feels glamorous to me.
right. It's a matter of keeping up with the Joneses and then finding out that The Joneses aren't people that you really wanna hang out with anyways, so why are you keeping up with
Right.
them?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all about
Yeah, I bought a
maintaining an image, you know?
yeah, like and, like, going on vacation to some fancy place because that's where everybody else is going and realizing you don't even like that place. You know what
Right,
I mean?
right,
'Cause you just get I think it's just human nature. I think it could happen to any of us. I don't mean to, like, criticize rich people just because they happen to have the fortune of being rich. I think these are, things that any of us could fall into given
right.
the opportunity.
And I think that is a good distinction, is that we're not trying to say that rich people are bad, and we're not trying to say that being rich is bad. What we're trying to say is that there's a certain culture that comes along with negative effects, which you could also say about being poor. Poor people aren't bad, but there is a certain culture that sometimes comes in to a poor class that is often negative. And so we're not saying that people are bad inherently due to their economic status. What we are saying is that there's a danger of conforming to a certain um, sort of culture when you're in that economic class. And so in The Great Gatsby, it's painting the picture of the wealthy culture where you have all the money you need, and so what is the point? Because right now, it's so what we have in kind of our daily lives, let's say my life, for example, I go to work, I make money so that I can be able to be home with my family. And it's an interesting loop, you know? You have to be away from your family to make money so that you can come home at the end of the day and be with your family. But now, when you're in this kind of rich mindset, you don't necessarily have to go to work. And if you do, it's not that often. And so you're just kind of home. And so you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do? You say, I have all this money. I can do almost anything I want. So what am I going to do? Well, what do people expect that somebody rich would do? And they say, well, maybe I should throw a party, even if you don't necessarily like parties, but because you want people to come over. It's the only way to get people to come over and hang out with you is to buy them a bunch of expensive alcohol and expensive food and have them come over to your house and have this big old party, even though at the end of the day, it's gonna leave you feeling kind of empty, which is what happens in this book frequently.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of what happened with Gatsby. I don't think he threw these lavish parties because he enjoyed parties. He just felt like that's what you do in the culture. This is how I show the society that I want to be a part of, that I have arrived and I have money. And but a lot of them that came over didn't even like meet their host. I remember Nick thought that was just appalling that people didn't
Right,
take the time to meet the host. They didn't even care, right? And so here Gatsby's trying to impress them, and yet they're not impressed. They're always gossiping about him and trying to figure out where he got his money because, oh, heaven forbid, it's not old money, so he must be up to something. He must, you know what I
right, it must
mean?
be something criminal, you know?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's part of what makes me I feel so bad for him?
So the book starts off with Nick Carraway, our narrator, and he moves into, the West Egg area, and he starts to meet these wealthy people. And while he's there, he meets, um, several different people. One of them or 2 of them are the Buchanans, Tom Buchanan and Daisy Buchanan, who are married, unhappily.
And
But,
Daisy's his
something
cousin.
Okay, yeah, so Daisy is okay, perfect. And so he also meets Jordan, and now but an interesting note about Tom is and now one sorry, I keep kind of backing up a little bit, but one of the things I do like a great about The Great Gatsby, the book, is I feel like the writing is very good in some areas. I think some of the descriptions that F. Scott Fitzgerald uses are very poetic, and I really like, there are moments in the book that kinda make me stop and say, "Huh, I really like how he said that. I really like how he explained this. That was very good." And so if you haven't read it, or if you have, I encourage you to read it again and kinda pay attention to those little in my opinion, it's kinda like little breaks from the story where you can kind of take a step back and admire the writing, and I think he did a great job with that. But now, jumping back to where I was, which was Tom Buchanan, when he's being described, he's basically described as somebody who peaked in high school. He was like a high school jock and maybe even a college jock, and he loved his time and he was very successful. And that was kind of the highlight of his life, is those were his golden years. And you can kind of see that throughout the book, is that throughout the rest of the book, he's kind of stagnant. He doesn't really do much. He just is there. And I think it's largely because he realizes that his glory days are past. And now all he has to look forward to is more of the everyday partying and then going home and eating whatever fancy food he has and going back to his wife who he doesn't really love. And it's just a very just boring, stagnant, kind of depressing lifestyle, which is funny because he's rich. Poor people, we think, if only I could be rich, then I'll be happy. And then you take these rich people and they're trying to buy happiness and they can't buy the happiness. What they can buy is experiences, but those experiences don't equal happiness, which is what we learn in this book. Is Great Gatsby was trying to buy happiness and he never was able to purchase it.
Right. And Tom, I think maybe that's why Tom has so many affairs, is
Right.
because he's seeking that, when you fall in love or you have a new affair, you get dopamine from that.
Hmm.
And he's seeking that. But he's just despicable because he not only has affairs, but he has affairs quite openly. Like he doesn't even feel the need to hide it. That's just rude.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's bad enough that you're having an affair, but you don't need to be obvious about it. And yet, so he openly has this affair, introduces people to his mistress like this is totally normal. And yet, when he finds out that Gatsby likes Daisy and that she might like him too, he just goes off he just has a fit. He's so angry. Like, what a hypocrite. I
Right.
just
He
really don't like that guy.
he definitely has a lot of narcissistic traits, which is interesting.
Yes, that's a good way to describe him. Yes.
Yeah, because he thinks that everything he does is okay, but as soon as somebody does something wrong to him, it's like the end of the world. And that's
Yeah, then it
very
goes off the rails.
narcissistic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think
I didn't
he's
think about that, but that's perfect way to describe it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so Tom, we'll just call him a non-clinical narcissist because he has a lot of those traits. And that's the fun thing for me about literature is I can give people labels. I don't have to worry about it being true or not because they're fictional. And so I
Yeah.
can have a fictional I can have a fictional license in these stories
Right.
because I can fictionally diagnose these fictional characters. And so I'm fictionally diagnosing fictional Tom with
Right.
fictional
With
narcissism. So
I like it.
and so yeah, Tom is not somebody that we like, obviously. And and then so they go to a party, they get to know each other a little bit, and there's all this talk about if Gatsby is an Oxford man or not. And just it's really just a lot of, this is what we in the wealthy class do, kind of. And so I don't know, there's not a whole lot of meat to this story. What I like in it is the psychology behind all of it. And so I won't go through too much we're not going to kind of follow it chronologically too much just because I don't feel like there's too much to kind of pick out of each moment. It's just an overall view of everything. And so, but however, there is a time we'll talk about this and let me know if there's anything you want to talk about before this. But they're all at the house and they're kind of bored. And so Daisy's like, I think we should go to town. And then Gatsby's like, okay, let's go to town. And Tom is like, oh, well, if you guys are going to town, then we're all going to town. And so they agree to do that. And then this interesting thing happens where they're trying to figure out who's going in whose car. I don't know why, but so Gatsby owns a yellow car, and so Tom ends up taking Gatsby's car, which is just strange. And then Gatsby and Daisy take a different car. Like, why? Like, how did this get arranged? Who thought this was a clever idea? They're like, oh well, let's just separate, and we'll have the husband and wife separate. It's dumb, I don't get it,
Yeah.
but that's what they do. And the whole time, Tom is being all paranoid because he's afraid that they're going to turn off or that they're not going to be following him. And so they eventually all get to town, and then they get into this fight, which we'll talk about. And Tom he blames the whole situation on going to town. He doesn't blame the situation on the struggling marriage or the fact that he's unfaithful because he's a narcissist. He blames it on anything besides himself, which is in this case, we should have never gone to town today. Like that was the problem when it really is that he's an unfaithful cheater. And and so now, but the fight is all about how Gatsby and Daisy have been having an affair because they like each other, and Tom didn't know about this, and so he's all surprised, even though, like my mom said, he's been having his own affairs off on the side, and it's just such a tangled web of these people. It's it's just one of those wild casts of characters that you're like, who are these people? And none of them even really like each other, except for
Right.
except for Tom, or except for Daisy and Gatsby, and Nick does like Gatsby. They become friends throughout the story because I feel like Gatsby is the most genuine out of that whole group. And that's something that is refreshing, I think, for Nick, because Nick isn't from this class of people. He's just there visiting. But yeah, so they have this whole excursion, and they talk about the affair and all of that, and then they end up leaving, and on the way back, then there's a car accident, and Tom's mistress is killed by his wife, actually, but he ends up blaming Gatsby for it, even though Gatsby wasn't the one driving. But yes, and so that's a big chunk of the story, and we'll kind of stop it there and talk a little bit about some of the psychology in the groups that we have there, and all of that, kind of the big spaghetti mess, if you would.
I like that, a big spaghetti mess. Yes, definitely.
All right, and so now this group, they're all out in town, and it's funny because they, in a sense, they all leave to go and find something to do because they're bored. And this trip of leaving and then finding that they're still bored is kind of symbolic to actually the entirety of their lives, at least what it seems, which is that they're all seeking something to do but falling short. They can't find happiness. So in a sense, they were bored at their house. And so they're like, let's go to town. Maybe there's happiness in the town. And so they go to the town, and things just kind of get worse. And so they don't find happiness there. And it's just one thing after another. And they're not finding happiness. And just in that like little micro scale, but on the macro scale, they're not finding happiness either throughout the entirety of their lives, like we talked about. So Tom, for example, we'll start with him. Tom, like we said, he peaked in high school. Those were his glory days, and everything else has just kind of been downhill. And so, what has he been doing? Well, he's been cheating. He's been doing all these affairs, hoping that that will bring him happiness. Because, like my mom mentioned, it's dopamine. Dopamine is what is the driving chemical of our mind. And so, he thinks he's going to find the joy in life from the novelty of other women, which is terrible, especially because he's married. If he wasn't married, a lot of people could say he could get away with that because that's just a common thing these days in our culture, which is also sad because that's not how you find happiness or healthy relationships, but it's accepted in our culture, even though I don't believe it should be. But now,
Right.
but now, especially when he's married, so that's never allowed. It's always terrible, but yet he's doing it anyways. And why? It's because he's looking for happiness that he doesn't have in his marriage and in his life. And so now, if he could find happiness, if you maybe what he needs is to go to therapy. If he went to therapy, they went to marriage therapy and they were able to, rekindle their flame, then the affairs would stop and maybe they could all be happy again. However, as we mentioned, I have fictionally declared him a narcissist, and narcissists are the hardest to treat in therapy because they don't believe there's anything wrong with them. And so I don't think Tom is going to get much help. I don't know.
Right. I think you're totally right, but I think you bring up a good point. I think many couples their marriages would benefit just from an understanding of dopamine, right?
Right.
Because I feel like we're raised on this Disney idea of happily ever after, and it sounds nice, but that's not really the way it works,
Right. They think
right?
the
And you
work
have to,
is getting into the relationship.
yeah. And of course, naturally, those feelings that you first have, the dopamine high of falling in love, is going to fade after time. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean you've fallen out of love. It means the dopamine decreased, right?
Right.
And so you have to, that's why they say marriages work, not just working through the disagreements, but you have to work to deepen your love in a different way than dopamine. You know what I mean? And I think just even just understanding that would help a lot of couples not keep, realize that what they're feeling is normal and natural. You haven't actually fallen out of love. You've just fallen out of dopamine.
Right.
So that wouldn't help Tom, but it could help other people.
Yes, and I think there's an unfortunate stigma that work is not enjoyable. Which it doesn't have to be true. It's enjoyable in a lot of cases because you don't like your work. However, working on a marriage should be enjoyable. And sure, if your marriage is struggling, then maybe it's not enjoyable at first. But the goal, the idea is that you work together and you enjoy that because there's a reason
Yes.
you got married in the first place. You had to work to keep your relationship going, but an interesting thing happened then, which is you enjoyed that. You enjoyed going on dates. You enjoyed spending time with each other because the dopamine was spiking and giving you this novelty that like, oh, this is all new and it's all fascinating and exciting and you're getting all these neurological rewards, and so it's rewarding. But yes, like it goes away over time because dopamine is all about new and novel things that help increase the species. And so now when you're married, then yeah, that starts to go away. But that doesn't mean that dates should go away. It doesn't mean that you should stop dating each other. It doesn't mean that you should stop cuddling. It doesn't mean you should stop doing all the stuff you did when you were dating because that's what got the relationship to be strong and healthy. So if you're going to stop doing that, then the relationship is going to stop being healthy as well. It you when you get married, it's not just like, okay, you are now good for life. Done. You don't have to work anymore. No, you just have to work harder, but it it
Right. I
it's a
think
good
the
kind of work though.
I think the dates and experiences that you have together throughout your life can give you small amounts of dopamine. It's just not the same as that initial feeling of falling
Right,
in love. But I think when you work at it and you build it and you through not only, getting through difficulties and disagreements, but also, like you say, going on dates and having experiences with each other, then you build something that's more powerful than dopamine and longer lasting. But you got to
right,
stay in the game and do that and not keep seeking the dopamine high. I think, sometimes when people have affairs, that's why, because they're looking for that. And then they get attracted to someone and they start having an affair. And now they feel like, oh, this is the way I once felt about my spouse, but I haven't felt this way for years. Well, there's a reason. And that feeling with the new person is not going to last either. That's what people don't realize sometimes, you
right.
know?
And now,
So, yeah, it's a
if
good work.
anyone's
Marriage is a good work. It's worth it.
yes, if anyone's interested in learning more about dopamine, then I recommend The Molecule of More. It's a book by Daniel Z. Lieberman. Uh, check it out. It's a great book. He talks a lot about dopamine and love and politics and just about everything you could think of with dopamine. So check it
Yep.
out. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Caleb recommended that to me, and that's why I have dopamine on the brain.
Right? It's
I'm
fascinating
reading
stuff.
reading it right now, so it's foremost in my thoughts. Like, having a lot of aha moments.
Right. And so but you take and so now that's so Tom is trying to get his dopamine from chasing other women. But
His
then you take
happiness, right?
right. Exactly. And then you take Daisy, his spouse, who is feeling neglected because she is, and she's having a hard time finding happiness because she's in a marriage that she's not happy in. And so she starts trying to find happiness in other ways too because her husband is neglecting her. So she starting to kind of go back to, the one person that she remembered did actually love her and that she loved, and which is Gatsby. And so she starts trying to find happiness by doing what she sees her husband is doing, and it doesn't work out for her either. And so you get all these characters, and they're all trying to find happiness in different ways, and it's just unsuccessful for all of them because they think that money's gonna buy it. Like like Gatsby, for example. We'll take our main character. Gatsby, he is a war veteran, my understanding, and he went to Oxford for a time, which becomes a big deal because
I
this
know,
posh
right?
class of rich culture people, they are very big on if he's an Oxford man or not, school pride and all. And but he starts off, he's not wealthy by any means, but then he inherits wealth. And because he inherits wealth, then now he's able to rub shoulders with the wealthy class, which now includes Daisy. And so when he originally wasn't able to be with Daisy because he wasn't rich enough, now he is rich enough. And so now he is able to be with Daisy, even though she's married, minor detail. And
I know, right?
right. And
Poor
so
Gatsby.
he tries, and they are starting to kind of get together, and they're having their little behind the scenes affair, which is not the right way to do things. And so he's seeking happiness in all the wrong ways. And so he also doesn't find happiness because all these people, they're trying to find happiness where they can't, you know? And
Exactly. And Gatsby is interesting because he the rest of these money people were apparently born into money, old
mhm,
money, right? And Gatsby made his fortune as an adult, which is really impressive. It's the American rags to riches story, right?
right,
And yet he did all that because he wanted to basically kind of be worthy, if you will, of Daisy. Because my understanding is that they had met before he went to the war and that they were truly like in love.
right,
But he wasn't honest with her that he was at first that he was not wealthy. She thought that he was wealthy like all the other young men. And then she found out he wasn't, and he went away to war, and she waited for a time. But then I guess she just decided that money would make her happier and went ahead and married Tom, right?
right,
And so Gatsby decided he had to get her back by getting money. And he did succeed in that goal in becoming lavishly wealthy, right? Through these amazing parties that everybody went to. And yet his real goal to get Daisy, he wasn't able to accomplish. I mean, they did have an affair, but part of the problem the night they went into town and had a fight, he confronts Tom and says, Daisy and I are having an affair, and she really loves me, and she never loved you, and she wants to be with me. Tell him, Daisy. And she just like froze and wouldn't say anything. He's like,
right,
Daisy, tell him you never loved him. And she wouldn't. She would not. I don't think she ever planned to leave Tom because she didn't want that money, and not just money, because Gatsby had plenty of that, but old money and the
right.
whatever prestige that went with that, you know? And so I just feel so sorry for Gatsby because he was, like all of them, I guess, were pursuing happiness, but I especially feel bad for him. I guess he's kind of relatable, like to all of us. Don't we wish we could, do the rags to riches thing and become
Mhm,
wealthy? And so he accomplished that. Huzzah! But it didn't make him happy. So sad.
right. Yeah, and that's the thing is it seems like there's this unfortunate belief that the American dream is to go from rags to riches and be wealthy and endlessly happy. That's the American dream, which is unfortunate. And so my sister, she described this book to me as it's not about, just these people and these parties and old sport. It's about the failure of the American dream and how the American dream really isn't what we all think it is. The American dream isn't that you can go from rags to riches and be endlessly wealthy and happy. What the American dream really ought to be, and what we're seeing in this story, is that you can be happy whatever class you're in if you're surrounded with people that you actually like. Because in this story, we have these people who are living the dream, supposedly, but they don't like their friends. Like like, what a strange world to live in where the people that they see on a daily basis are people that they don't like, you know? And and so their whole goal, their whole attempt to be happy is failing on every front because they're looking in all the wrong places. They're trying to look in their bank accounts and their safes to find happiness where real where it really is the pivotal part of this story, which is love, is that all these characters are trying to find love, but money is getting in the way, just endlessly in the way. And so in this story, being rich isn't how you get happy. Being rich is hindering the happiness of all these, it's funny, these rich people, but these poor people, like these poor people are having such a hard time, but it's not because they don't have the money, it's because they have too much money. There's actually a book out there. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I haven't read it, but it's essentially it's about lottery winners and how a lot of lottery winners, I think, is Money from Nothing, if I'm remembering right. And it's about how lottery winners, when they win the lottery, they think it's the best thing ever. But then their friends start to turn on them, and people that they've never met start to say, "We need this money more than you do." And and so these lottery winners, they retire. They're getting all this hate from people around them, saying, "You don't deserve the money, I do." And
Bro, can you give me a loan for any
right.
number of whatever thing?
Right, and so then but then they have all this money, so they don't need to work, and so they quit their jobs, they go on vacations, they do all this stuff, and what happens is, not only do they get really bored and feel like they need to go back to work, but a lot of the time they end up broke again because they got millions of dollars and didn't know how to use it and found out that it wasn't the answer to all of their problems. And that's kinda what the story is it's showing that money isn't the answer to life's issues. Money isn't the great Gatsby, you know? Money is it's just a tool. You can either use the tool right or you can use it wrong, and these people, they were using it wrong. They could be rich and happy, but they chose to be rich and hang out in the wrong crowds, and so the richness made them unhappy, when really what they needed to be happy was rich relationships, and that's what they were lacking in.
Yes. Yes, and, so can we I hope I'm not skipping forward too
No, let's
much, but
just move
it
on.
makes me think of when Gatsby dies,
Mhm.
Nick is just appalled and mortified that he can't get anyone to come to the funeral. All these people that came to Gatsby's parties can't be bothered to come to his funeral. Especially Daisy. He thought for sure Daisy would come to the funeral, but no, her
Right,
and Tom packed their bags and left the country on some vacation or other, right? And
right,
it just really stood out to me. The only people that were interested in going to Gatsby's funeral in the end was Nick, his friend, and his father, who Gatsby had kind of ignored because he thought it's kind of implied that he thought his parents were poor and backwards.
right,
But his dad came and his dad was so proud of him. Oh, my boy, he's gone so far, bless his heart. And I just felt like that was kind of Fitzgerald pointing out that, where your happiness really comes from is from, like you're saying, Caleb, relationships and the people that you surround yourself with, whether you have money or not. It's not money that's the problem. It's often that culture that comes along with the money. And
yeah,
these
absolutely.
really hollow relationships that aren't making anybody in this story happy, but especially poor Gatsby, you
Right.
know?
Well, and hollow is a very apt word because something that one of the things I did like I said, there's moments that the writing made me step back and say, that was really good." And one of the things is there are multiple times when when Gatsby's house is described, and it's always described as very nice and awesome, but is always described as what rings to me through the description is empty. And that all it has all these great rooms, but there's nothing in the rooms. There's no one in the rooms. And it's kinda what it always rung to me was that the rooms weren't filled with family. They weren't filled with people. They were just rooms. They were just boxes, you know? And And so yeah, so when his father comes and he's noticing this like really amazing house, well, there's a fundamental issue there, which is that the father hadn't been to the house before. If Gatsby
Right.
had invited his family over, then perhaps things could have been better. Think he might have actually been able to find happiness if he allowed family into his life. And if he was able to, move on, say, okay, Daisy's married. I'm going to move on. I'm going to find someone else. And he was able to get married and have some kids, then he could have taken his riches and his relationships and had wealth and relationships. A win-win. Then that's where you're able to find that true happiness is when you have those rich relationships, the money doesn't matter. However, if you have money and rich relationships, the money's kind of a nice little bonus. It makes things kind of go a little more smoothly. And he could have had that, but he got so focused on the past that he wasn't able to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so sad.
And so I just feel like that. So that's kind of the overall feeling and takeaway I get from this book is that you can have endless money, and what you'll get is empty rooms. You'll get
Yeah, I like
a
that.
just an
Empty
empty
room.
house. You can have a mansion, but nobody's gonna be in it except for you. And which perhaps is part of why he throws parties is because he likes to see the house filled, but he's not able to do that in any way except for to offer people food and alcohol. The only way to get people
Right.
to come to his house is to pay them to be there.
And the irony of that is they come to his parties and then they don't even bother to meet him.
Right?
So his house is full of people and he's still alone.
Yeah. That's just it. You can have riches or you can have rich relationships. And I'm not saying you can't have both. I'm saying the problem is when you focus so much on the riches and the money, you often lose sight of the rich relationships. Whereas if you focus on the rich relationships, you may also get money, but the relationships will be what's fundamental and important. And so you'll be able to have that happiness that you're looking for. Whereas in this story, everything was backwards. They all looked for the money first and then the relationships, when they should have been looking for the relationships and then the money.
Right. Oh, I love that. I agree. I mean, imagine how different things would have been if Daisy would have just stayed with Gatsby. Because in the
Right.
beginning, because I feel like
Just
they
waited,
really, yeah, just waited for him and not chosen money.
Hmm.
Because I'm not sure that she ever loved Tom or that he ever loved her.
Right.
Maybe I'm, overstepping there, but I think because there's a scene that says something about how, remember Jordan's telling the story that one day, like they're getting ready for Daisy's wedding or something, and she got a letter. You assume it was from Gatsby,
Hmm.
and she gets really upset. And it just made me think that she still loved Gatsby, but she was marrying Tom for the money. I
Right.
could be wrong, but that's how I interpret that.
Well, I think that's right. I
So,
think that is the case. And it's just that she wanted the security that came with money rather than the security that comes with a relationship. And you make your choices and you got to stick with them, and sometimes you make the wrong ones, and in this case we have great examples of a lot of people who made the wrong choices. And so the Great Gatsby is really about missing out on relationships because you're so focused on money. And which again, we're not saying that money is bad. We're saying that the
right.
problem is focusing on money instead of focusing on relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that money is the problem. I think, like you were saying earlier, the American dream, which is to, go from rags to riches and have money, that's misguided, right?
Right.
If we could as a culture change the American dream to one where we focus on having rich relationships, regardless of whether we have money or not, then I think everybody, rich and poor, would be a lot happier.
Right. And the only problem with that is that, that doesn't is that it's not the American dream. It should just be the dream. you know? It's not.
True, not just for Americans.
Right. Well, and I'm not correcting you, I'm just correcting that because I said that too, and but I want the point to be that is not an American trait that you have to be American to have great relationships. I think that's a problem a lot of people have is that they get so focused on, uh, that in America you can have money and then you can have relationships, where so I spent some time in Ghana and Mama, you spent some time in Venezuela, and
Right.
I bet you have a lot of similar experiences where where I met some of the greatest people. They had really good relationships. They were happy families, and they had
Oh,
almost nothing.
definitely.
They had like nothing, but they were happy because they had rich relationships. And the problem is I met so many people that would tell me, "Bring me back to America with you so I can be rich." And there's a line that always stood out in a movie, it's called Concussion. It has Will Smith. It's about, um, chronic encephalopathy or
I've
something like
seen
that.
that.
But it's a
Good
very good
one.
movie. But W Will Smith plays a Nigerian doctor, and he explains that when he was in Nigeria, people would talk about how they would rather go to America than going to heaven because they just viewed had such a skewed view that America was so great that if they could just go to America, then all their dreams would come true, which is so sad because in this book, we see that that is not true. That even if you can go 0 to $1,000,000, that doesn't mean that you're gonna be happy in the end. You could have $50 and you'll be able to be happy if you have rich relationships. One more note. I keep on tying all these other things in, but there's one of my favorite lines in, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens is when, oh, Mr. Wow, now I'm blank on his name. I know it, but anyways, I'll remember it. But the character he's telling David that if if you wanna be happy in life, then you have to understand that, and I'm gonna paraphrase it because I don't know how British money works, especially back in the day. But he basically says, if your income is $100 and your spending is $99, then it's total happiness. But if your income is $100 and you spend $101, misery. And it's just that's so true because you don't have to have endless amounts of money to be happy. You just have to know how to be able to take care of yourself, take care of your family, and but ultimately have a good relationship. We're social creatures. We need a social life that's with people that we enjoy, not just like Scrooge and man, I'm doing this all over the place. But it's not just Scrooge where you spend all your time counting your money. That's not happiness. Happiness is like Bob Cratchit's family. They were poor, but they were happy.
Right. Right. And I think also, like with relationships, like we talked a lot about marriage because that's a topic that comes up in Gatsby. But I think, not everyone has the opportunity to have a happy marriage for different reasons. Maybe they didn't get married or they're in an abusive
Right.
relationship or they're widowed or there's different scenarios. But relationships could be many things. A relationship with your best friend or with your parent, with your siblings, with your whoever that you have these relationships with. I
Right.
mean, definitely marriage is a big one, but there
It's
are
not the only
also,
one. Yeah.
yeah, well, and we definitely need more relationships than that because even if you
Mhm.
have a great marriage, you can't, expect, not reasonably, expect your spouse to be everything for you, right? Like,
That in
I love
itself
knitting.
becomes a not a very healthy relationship.
Exactly. I love knitting. My husband doesn't want to talk to me about knitting, right? Should I expect him to? No, of course not. I have girlfriends that I talk about knitting with, right? And I think that's just you know, we should all have, at least more than one relationship would be the goal, right?
Right.
Some people have many. It depends if you're extroverted or introverted, how many relationships you might want or maintain. But I'm just saying, we're not saying that it has to be marriage. There are, other relationships can bring joy and happiness to your life as well.
Right, absolutely, and yeah, and exactly, you don't have to have multiple relationships, you don't have to have specific relationships, but you have to have good relationships for you, whatever that means, and that's the way to be happy in life, is it's not about what you have or what you don't have, it's about who's around you. It's it's basically the plot of every Hallmark movie that ever is made, is it's all about the people around you. It's the very Disney answer that at the end of the day, what matters is the people that you're with. And also just because I don't want anyone to judge me in my lack of Dickens, it was McCorber. That was the character. So sorry, that's just a brief thing. But that's but yes, it's all about, if you want to have a happy life, you've got to get some sturdy relationships. I
And
just don't
that
know the
should
better way
be
to say
our
it.
our focus. I think if you want to be happy, and we all do, then your focus should be more on relationships than things and money.
Absolutely. And so in this book, it ends very sad, but how else could it end? You have all these characters who were looking for happiness in all the wrong places. They're not going to find it. And so how are you going to have a happy ending? And that's how the book ends, is it's just a sad ending. And it's because you have a bunch of sad people trying to find happiness when they should have listened to our podcast, where we could have told them that they
Right.
just need to find some good, healthy relationships. Tom and Daisy
Right.
need therapy, maybe a divorce, whatever's right for them. They need some relationship help. And Gatsby, you need to move on, you know?
Yes, poor Gatsby, he
So,
needed to move on.
and Nick,
Definitely.
you gotta be careful about who your friends are. You're not in the best of groups. So
Right. That'd be interesting, a follow-up, a sequel to Great Gatsby if Nick went home and had some healthy relationships, or if he stays in the West Egg and turns into one of those horrible people.
mhm,
Let's
exactly.
hope not. I hope he went home.
Yes, I choose to believe that. I mean, well, I guess even it sounds like West Egg wasn't even what it used to be because everybody else left, you know? So maybe it's just Nick and Jordan there now, right? So
Right,
maybe
sure.
they can both stay there. They can get a maybe they can become a healthy relationship in and of themselves.
Really change the culture, maybe.
Right. They can be the American dream. And that's what we'll choose to take away from this book. It's not what it's not what F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote, but it's how I'm choosing to interpret it. That everybody left except for Nick
Right.
and Jordan, and now they have their opportunity to find happiness. Because
Right.
it's kind of like we said back in the beginning. Maybe Jordan wouldn't have been kind of this like unlikable character if she had better friends. And so this is her
Yeah.
chance to have better friends. So let's leave this podcast hoping the best for Nick and Jordan, and hope that they can either find happiness between the two of them or somewhere else, because
Yes.
the rest of them didn't seem to have much luck.
Sounds good. Maybe next week we'll talk about a book that describes the foibles of the poor culture. 'Cause-
Right.
But we picked on rich people a lot, it
That's
seems like.
true. That's true. I feel like we're starting to do an unintentional pattern. And again, we're not saying rich people are bad. We're saying just that there's a dangerous culture that comes with money on both sides of the scale, even though we've only talked about the one side. So don't get us wrong. We would also like to be rich. So I'm not trying to put that karma out there. If money
Right.
chooses, it, in the words of Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, if money is a curse, then let God strike me with it, and may I never recover.
Yes, definitely.
But for the time being, I'm happy with my life because I have a great relationship with my wife and my daughter and my family, and I have some good friends. So I don't have riches, but I have rich relationships. And because of that, I am happy.
Yes, I have rich relationships also. And as you're saying, that's what we're wishing for Nick and Jordan and their future fiction lives.
Absolutely. And so, with that, we'd like to thank all of you real people for listening to our podcast and send a good fictional some good fictional hopes and good wishes for Nick and Jordan and also Daisy. I feel like there's not much we can do about Tom because he is a fictionally diagnosed narcissist. So,
That's right.
anywho, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you some more next time.
Yeah, till next time.